ESPN. Your retweeted your tweet.
You're in the 06010 Focus Fantasy Focus.
Happy hump day to you. Welcome into the Fantasy Focus Football Podcast. Field, Mike Clay, activated off of IR. That's good. And
Indeed.
Stephania, her lovely and wonderful usual self. We're going to have a great, good to see you, great jam-packed show today with lots of football. But before we get there, we have some very important words from two very special people. For those watching the live stream, check this video right now.
Man, I'm parched. I got good news for you, sir. Two thirsty cows coming out. Thirsty cows? Man, I'm refreshed.
Pretty good. For those that may have been watching on the live stream, those are Zach and Matt, two of Kyle's very good friends up at Kyle's wedding. His nuptials from over the weekend. He is still married. I saw the ring on his finger this morning. Well done there. Do they actually listen to the podcast, Kyle?
On occasion, they do.
Okay.
I'm guessing. Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
Was that water?
That was there. It turns out you're supposed to have like a specialty cocktail, and Marisa made this big fancy one. They're like, Kyle, what do you want? Like, I don't drink. And then she came up with the Thirsty Kyle idea. So ice water was going a big seller at my wedding.
How about that? That is classic.
It was good.
How was your wedding? Well, pretty full of ice water. I love it. I bet, but I know Marisa and her friends had a great time.
Yeah. For her.
Sure did.
Marisa.
They had a lot of fun. Congrats again to the newlyweds back in Connecticut. We missed them. It's crazy how much you miss just one cog in the wheel when he is gone for one podcast. If ever the value of Kyle was doubted for this show, it was reinforced just how incredibly important he is. He is a huge part of what we do every single day, and most importantly, could not be any happier for he and Marisa.
Thank you.
And by the way, we had to make Kyle stop working over because he's that dedicated to the show that he was like, no, I can help out on Sunday.
You guys hung up on me on Friday. Not cool.
Kyle, for the sake of your marriage, and by the way, Marisa looked beautiful in all the wedding photos that I've seen up to this point. For the sake of your marriage, trust us on this one.
Take
you don't work the day before your wedding, as I have exclaimed many times. I got married on June 22nd. I'm not sure anybody heard from me from about St. Patrick's Day until after the wedding. So.
Fair.
Take it from one married man to the other.
You got it.
Enjoy it. Congrats again to you. Time now for some football.
Rewind. Fantasy news
from the National Football League.
This is the instant replay.
No Daniel here today. He is down in New York for some business. Instead, we have Jackson behind the glass. And Jackson becoming another part of our family here. You are part of the family, not becoming a part of. You're part of the family, my man.
Oh, really appreciate it. Really feels wholesome.
We got to work on that. Matthew came up with a nickname for you that we feel like didn't stick, right?
Yeah, we went with the obvious Otter.
Yeah.
And he shortened it to OOJ with Jackson being in there. So a little bit of a mix.
I feel like there's the chance for some misinterpretation there. So maybe we'll bypass it. Normally, we do not talk about defensive news as it pertains to fantasy football. Things are really unpredictable. For all those of you that took the Patriots as the number one defense during the offseason, I praise you. Unless you're Bill Belichick, I don't think it actually happened. I wonder if Bill Belichick does play fantasy football. But we digress. We talk about defense for a second here because Jalen Ramsey finally was traded last night. News came first from Adam Schefter, who announced that the Jaguars had agreed to trade Jalen Ramsey. That's right, that guy. The guy with the injured back.
Yeah.
To the Los Angeles Rams.
How
is that back, Steffi?
I feel like it's going to be feeling so much better all of a sudden. And this is, what's unfortunate about that? Like, all kidding aside, because you never want to see, you don't want to see injury manipulation happen blatantly.
For sure.
And back pain is one of those things you can, it's so nebulous. It's not like you can say, oh, no, you don't have it, and it can flare up and it can calm down really quickly. So, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt that he had something there, but may he have really taken advantage of that something to serve the purpose of getting himself to another team? Perhaps.
So there's the old saying. I know I heard it for the first time through Mark Schlereth, our former colleague here at ESPN, but I know many have said it before, is that, like, I've never met somebody who used to have a bad back, right? Like, it's once you have a bad back, it's just that way in perpetuity. I feel like Jalen Ramsey might become the first person I've ever met who used to have a bad back. So I'm like, I don't know. Let's grasp for a straw here. Got any fantasy content that you can tie this Jalen Ramsey trade into?
Well, I think the only thing we could do here is look at the schedule, right? The rest of the season to see how this affects some players. So obviously DeAndre Hopkins, T.Y. Hilton twice. The Colts play the Jags twice, and Corey Davis get a little boost because they primarily play quite a bit on the perimeter. So you like that. Robby Anderson's coming up. Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, Tyrell Williams, Julio Jones. Don't have to face Jalen Ramsey. They might see some A.J. Boye, but don't have to face Ramsey. That's good news. Bad, he switches division. Obviously, the division, the other teams in that division have a lot of their top guys that play inside, so this might not be as impactful.
Larry Fitzgerald, Tyler Lockett, for example.
Exactly. So it might not be too impactful. Also, San Francisco doesn't really have a standout perimeter guy just yet. We'll see how that transpires.
No, I was actually going to say that. I was like, he'd have to decide.
I don't think he would shadow.
I don't think he would.
In that scenario. But on their upcoming schedule, maybe Julio Jones this week. We'll see how he's integrated. We'll kind of follow that the next few days. Juju Smith-Schuster, Allen Robinson, Marquise Brown, DK Metcalf, Amari Cooper have one more game that's going to be a little bit tougher for them. That'll maybe be featured in the receiver cornerback column, which you can find at ESPN Plus, because they have a little bit of a tougher schedule. So that's really all you can do with this information right now.
Let's be clear. This is much more of a quote-unquote real football story than it is a fantasy football story. But when it sort of shook the football earth last night, right? All of a sudden it's trending on Twitter and everybody has a take and everybody's trying to figure out the next witty, creative way to contribute to the conversation. All we know is that Jalen Ramsey is a Ram, and we'll see just how much he plays this Sunday, because if we get word that he's going to play, they expect him to play a full snap allotment, well, then maybe Julio Jones, maybe he's no longer a daily fantasy consideration in the same capacity that he was prior. I believe Julio is the consensus number one wide receiver this week in our Week 7 ESPN.com rankings.
Yeah, and we'll see. By the way, Aqib Talib for the Rams goes on IR. They also traded Marcus Peters to Baltimore. So we'll see if, like, the number 2 perimeter receiver against the Rams, it becomes like a funnel situation where, like, Calvin Ridley, for example, is a great play against Troy Hill, who's the number 2. So that's something we'll monitor in the coming weeks.
All right, so I said that we don't often talk about defensive news because rarely does it tie into fantasy. Sometimes when we talk about offensive news, it doesn't necessarily tie a ton into fantasy, but we'll try. Ryan Tannehill was informed last night that he will be the Titans quarterback, at least for this week, against the Chargers. We'll see whether that's a permanent change or whether this is simply a 1 week or a week-by-week arrangement. He takes over from Marcus Mariota. Now, he stepped in for Marcus Mariota this past week, and that game was out of hand. They played just gross football against the Broncos in Denver. One of those games that, like, if you didn't see a ton of it, I don't blame you. Like, first of all, there's more games going on during the 4 p.m. time slot than usual this past weekend, and also, like, there's more entertaining games. Like, the Jets Cowboys was entertaining. We had some, the Rams 49ers game was entertaining. Like, there was enough good football to watch. Yeah, I can't imagine you were.
Yeah.
Mike, based off what we saw last week, and then maybe what your projections tell you, does this actually mean a boost or perhaps suppressed value for Titans pass catchers? Because if it's the latter, then we're in big trouble.
Yeah, I have a little bit of optimism. As I told you in the pre-show meeting, when I put Tannehill in for Mariota in the projections and hit refresh, like, all of the skill guys in Tennessee moved up like 3 spots. Like Corey Davis from like 52 to 49, right. Just a few spots. So that's something, I guess. I mean, we're hoping that maybe he'll find 1 or 2 of these guys in this offense that he throws the ball often to, and they can provide consistent fantasy value, whether it's Corey Davis, who Ryan Tannehill targeted 4 times out of his 18 throws, including penalty plays on Sunday. Maybe it's Corey Davis. Adam Humphries, he targeted him 3 times. A.J. Brown 3 times. Delaney Walker twice. Maybe he kind of builds a 6 to 7 target a game sort of repertoire with these guys. So that's what we have to monitor in the coming weeks. There's some optimism, but for now, these guys, best as kind of bench options aside of maybe Walker, who's a back-end tight end 1.
Yeah, I agree on everything you said. For the 2 wide receivers, because I'm with you, like Delaney Walker, if you haven't, you're probably playing him because tight ends are so hard to find. But those 2 wide receivers are kind of interesting for this reason. Corey Davis, 5th overall pick in the draft, and like one of the most common refrains surrounding Davis is that he is a good quarterback away from being a star. Tannehill may not be a good quarterback. He may be an average quarterback, and perhaps that unleashes a little bit more from Corey Davis. And then Adam Humphries got $9 million a year this offseason. I know that's not Odell Beckham Jr. money, top of the market, but still,
But he's been
when you
invisible.
pay a guy $9 million, you expect more of what we've seen so far. I think it's been slightly better over the past 2 weeks with 10 catches. Some of that might have been game flow, but I don't think you sign a guy that is dependent upon game flow at $36 million for 4 years, if that makes sense. So I'm hopeful that one of those two players, if not both, become like slightly more fantasy relevant. Like my thought is, I want Adam Humphries to become what Jamison Crowder can be for this Jets offense, which in 2 games with Sam Darnold, 26 targets. Now I get it, that's a lot, but still, like I want to see something like 8 to 10 targets a game for Adam Humphries because you paid him $9 million a year. That to me doesn't feel like too much to ask.
I will say this. Delaney Walker was one of the few reliable targets, semi-reliable with Mariota, because you would often look to him. He was his outlet guy. Delaney Walker would get touchdowns from Mariota. And I'm a little concerned because if everybody else's target share goes up, what happens to Delaney Walker?
Yeah.
Although Delaney Walker did say that Tannehill had been an elite quarterback in this league. So maybe that, little
Great
pump
teammate,
up.
I like that guy.
Great,
I like him.
Vouching for him, when he was talking to reporters at his locker, maybe that earns him a couple tosses his way.
There you go. I like that. You're lobbying for passes before the guy's actually under center. Well done by you, Delaney Walker. Josh Gordon sat out practice yesterday for the Patriots. We got all kinds of sort of Patriots wide receiver news. So here is the top to bottom play-by-play. Josh Gordon did not practice on Tuesday. Because the Patriots played last Thursday, they were practicing on Tuesday, but because they don't play again until Monday, they actually have today off. So you'll have no more update on Josh Gordon.
Their first official injury report comes out on
Thursday. So it's an odd timeline for a couple of reasons. Josh Gordon, not practicing. Philip Dorsett was practicing, as was N'Keal Harry, first-round pick this year, who has been designated as a short-term IR player. Remember, each team gets 2 of those players per season at most. And the way it works is you have to miss 6 weeks of practice and 8 weeks of games. So the earliest we'd see N'Keal Harry would be week 9. So we're not quite there yet. It's only week 7. But sort of an interesting player that I'd imagine we'll talk about more over the next couple of weeks. But with Josh Gordon sitting, Philip Dorsett practicing, we know Edelman is obviously practicing as well, Mike. Is perhaps the door open to Jacoby Myers, a guy who flashed in the preseason and actually flashed last Thursday night when filling in for Gordon and Dorsett after Gordon got hurt during that game against the Giants?
I think he'll play a lot. He ran 33 pass routes in that game, a second only to Julian Edelman. But the thing is, Philip Dorsett, we expect back in this game. So he'll be the 2, Myers the 3, most likely. So I don't see a path to maybe flex value for Myers this season. Obviously, at any point, someone could catch a touchdown if they see 5-6 targets. But I think Edelman's obviously a guy locked in your lineup. I think Dorsett's a guy you're starting to, assuming Josh Gordon is out.
Well, it's interesting. When you say you're starting, so let's say Josh Gordon sits. You're starting Philip Dorsett as in like he would be a top 30 play for you. Would he be a top 40 play? How high is he climbing your rankings if Gordon sits?
I have him wide receiver 32 right now. So that would be a borderline 3. You may want to start him.
That
if
is Gordon not playing, you're saying?
That's with Gordon not playing.
Okay.
Yeah. So I remember out of the gate, Dorsett was kind of lucky. We'll say he caught all of his targets, was on the fantasy radar, was over his head. And we said, well, he needs more targets to sustain this. Well, his last 2 games, weeks 3 and 4, 7 targets and 9 targets. So if he keeps that up, and he should in this game, right? If Gordon's out, he should be in that range, no doubt. I definitely think he's on that radar. So yeah, if he's out there on waivers, and I'm sure he is because he was out for a couple of weeks, scoop him up, and you could consider him for your flex.
It's kind of interesting. I was just thinking about this because when I watch the Patriots and I watch the Packers, I sort of think to myself like, oh man, these are really grinded out drives for teams that we know can be really good offensively. When I see the best of Philip Dorsett, I'm like, that guy's he's not like a good player. He's like a good NFL wide receiver. He can be a good NFL wideout. He was a first-round pick for a reason. But then he sort of fades into a less prominent role, and you're like, you kind of forget about him, right? If he's healthy and Josh Gordon is out, there is a chance for Philip Dorsett to once again say, I am a good NFL wide receiver. Maybe it's the last chance, but there's a chance at the very least.
It's a weekly game, and he's positioned this week for decent volume in the number 2 pass-heaviest offense in the NFL. Like, the Patriots went back to the run last year.
Yeah.
That's gone. Like, they're back to the previous decade. They're throwing the ball a ton. So
it'll be interesting because he's coming off a hamstring injury. They missed 2 weeks for.
Yeah.
And you're always nervous when these guys are coming back from that because that's the easiest thing to aggravate. And so he was moving around at practice yesterday, but he probably won't test it really. It's hard to simulate anything until you get into a game. But if you remember what the Patriots did last year when Josh Gordon came over and he had a hamstring issue he was dealing with, they changed what they outlined for him in terms of play structure based on his recovery. So he wasn't getting like deep shots. It was very short and intermediate routes initially. Just wonder if they'll do something similar with Dorsett coming off the same type of injury.
They play on Monday night, so they've got an extra day, and actually Dorsett's actually had 3 extra days because he did not play this past Thursday night. Mike, one thing I like about you, well, the only thing I like about you actually is, sorry, that was like vintage. I don't like Mike Clay stuff right there. My bad.
That's a nice throwback there.
OFP, one of your, I think, this is proprietary, right? Or at least the idea was OFP, right?
Yeah.
This was your idea. This was
Should have that
your.
little,
there's been variations.
trademark sign next to a little T.
Yeah, there's been variations out there, but with a lot of the new data we have available now, you could really kind of adjust fantasy points to opportunity, essentially. Basically, the expected total for the average player based just on usage, which is so important. Variance is so wild in the NFL. So this kind of boils it down to how much opportunity is the player getting going forward. And we post this at ESPN Plus every week, the leaderboards.
Okay, so let's get into some of the players that actually overachieved and underachieved last week, Mike, because you'll take it in your fantasy lineup if a guy overachieves. It might just be sort of a buyer beware going forward. So Robby Anderson had a 92-yard touchdown last week against the Cowboys, which was the crux of his 23.5-point day. But maybe there are a couple of warning signs there, Michael.
Yeah, the expected total was 13, so obviously well above his head. Anytime you have a 90-plus yard touchdown, you're unlikely to match that with your OFP. That was his only top 35 of the season, but of course, Sam Darnold hasn't played most of the season, so there's some room for optimism long-term here. I look back at Anderson's targets when Sam Darnold has played since Darnold returned from injury late last season. Remember, they had that strong final month of the season. Targets 7, 11, 13, 9, 7, and 8. That's an average of 9.2 per game, a 29% target share. So that connection there really developing, provides some optimism for Robby Anderson. That said, they are playing the Patriots this week, and this is kind of incredible. Robby Anderson's career numbers against the Patriots: 38 targets, 14 catches, 144 yards, 0 touchdowns. That's on 213 pass routes across 7 games. He's been shadowed by Malcolm Butler, Stephon Gilmore in all of those games, except for the first 2 his rookie season. They just shut him down. I mean, he has no chance. He would not be he's not in my top 50 this week. I'm not going to start him.
Yeah, I think he actually is 49 for me and 50 for Starfania. So he makes our top 50, but like this is one of those. This is like, you're making your wedding invitations, and it's like, that person's invited because it's like your mom's cousin who you don't even really know, but you kind of have to invite them.
Listen to the podcast.
That's a good point. I take that. Yeah. Do my mom's cousins? Yeah, she'd have a couple cousins at the wedding, but I like those cousins anyways.
You like them most weeks, just not this week.
Yeah, Robby Anderson.
You like them when Sam Darnold's present to keep them in order, but otherwise.
Mom's, I don't know, roommate or something like that back in the day. Will Fuller was on the other side of this one, though, Mike. Friend of ours, friend of the program, Dov Kleiman, who does, he was an independent reporter on Twitter. You can see him, I believe it's NFL_Dov Kleiman, DOV. And he tweeted a compilation of 3 touchdowns that Will Fuller should have had last week against the Chiefs.
I was going to say, drops.
And I say, they're drops. A drop is one of those actually tricky metrics because they're defined, different services, including ESPN stats and information versus a place like PFF, et cetera. As Kyle will tell you, they're a little bit tricky. They're defined differently, and our standard of what is a drop versus what is just an errant throw versus what is just an incomplete pass.
If you go to the old-fashioned eyeball test.
Well, I used to have I used to have football coach growing up. They would say, you get a hand on the football, you catch the football, right? That's how it goes. That was their threshold for what is a drop versus what is not a drop. So I would contend that he had 3 dropped touchdowns. Others might say, well, those would have been difficult plays. This is a guy that had 53 fantasy points last week. I don't think people are sitting there saying, something, hey, those 3 drops, no big deal. It could have been a monster day, though.
Yeah, no doubt. 9 fantasy points in the game. His OFP was 21, one of the highest at the position. 21 doesn't sound high, but it is based on usage for sure. 44 yards on 9 targets, as you mentioned. I have him with 3 drops, so I'm with you.
There we go, Mike. Met in the middle right there. I like it. Yeah.
44. Yeah, I mentioned the 44 yards. He had 190 air yards in that game. That was 4th most in the league. So he left 146 air yards on the table. That was most against receivers. And that's really where that comes from, right? So that's great long term. You like that opportunity. As long as that keeps up, he's going to deliver some big fantasy days. You also love his usage so far this season, a 25% target share, 10-plus targets. Each of his past 2 games, he's top 15 at the position in routes, in targets, in receiving yards. And by the way, his OTD, which, again, he dropped some end zone targets. Obviously, it's going to be a problem. Is 3.2. That is 4th at wide receiver. So a lot of target volume, a lot of work near the goal line. You like that. You just don't like the drop.
He's tied for the league lead in drops. And it's interesting because DeAndre Hopkins was dropping too. Like, I started wondering, like, what's going on? Is there something with way that
I know.
It's just so weird because you never see D-Hop drop the ball. And Fuller, I was like, well, maybe he's just getting his feet wet playing again. I don't know what's going on there. But it feels like we can get another week like we had, maybe not 53 fantasy points or whatever it was when I, beat Field a couple weeks ago. That was Will Fuller's doing.
I don't remember that, actually. That's
blame
weird.
Will Fuller. But I feel like there's other big opportunity weeks.
Yeah, he only has 1 weekly finish better than 34th, which may seem surprising, but the volume's there, right? Like,
the past 2 weeks have been encouraging, and this is not a fantasy analytical sort of thought. It's just an observation. They look like they're primed and loaded to make a huge push right now. Like, this is the kind of team that I think is going to enter every single game and say, we should win, and we should put 35 points on you. The way that Deshaun Watson is playing right now, he is off the charts. If not for Russell Wilson, I think he'd be the MVP of the league right now. Having won at Arrowhead this past week against the Chiefs, played well defensively. Like, I think the Texans are in. It's a great challenge this weekend against the Colts, but they're in for a massive run ahead. So we're going to get to Fantasy 32 in just a moment, but I'm super excited. You know why? Because 1 week from tonight, I am going to the Lion King, and here's the reason why that is pertinent right now. Do you ever feel like ticketing websites make getting the event difficult on purpose?
All the time.
It's as if they are so big they can get away with not caring about the customer experience. The real question is, how easy could it be if those ticketing sites actually cared? With millions of live events and a price match guarantee, SeatGeek proves there is a better way. Search for sports, live music, comedy, and the Lion King in Boston, so you can take your wife and your mom and go have a great Wednesday night. SeatGeek has tickets you're looking for all in one place. In an industry that tends to stagnate, SeatGeek decided to stand out from the crowd. Why is SeatGeek better than the rest? A quick look at the App Store shows over 50,000 5-star reviews. How's that for customer satisfaction? SeatGeek pulls together millions of tickets from all over the web. Then it rates each deal on a scale of 1 to 10. Finally, SeatGeek displays them on an interactive seat map. SeatGeek breaks down the details. Green dots mean good deals, red dots are overpriced. And every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets with confidence. SeatGeek will even give you $10 off your first SeatGeek purchase, and all you need to do is use our promo code. Download the SeatGeek app and use promo code FFF for $10 off on your first purchase. That's promo code FFF for $10 off on your first purchase. Now we move over to Fantasy 32, another one of Mike's great pieces that goes out every single week
Mike's
on
so
ESPN
prolific.
Plus. Yeah, Mike, you are quite prolific.
I'm
You are
a
very busy.
nerd. That's what I am.
Oh, come on. Mike, can you rely on James Conner? Very simple question, but perhaps a not so simple answer.
You mean the top scoring fantasy running back of week 6? Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about it. And that was with Benny Snell carrying the ball a ton. Actually, I believe he outcarried him 17 to 6.
Got hurt, yes.
Yeah, he got hurt. I mean, this, not to take away from all that you're about to bestow upon us, but James Conner has been getting banged up a lot. And I've been trying to watch, like, how does he play? He is very physical in the way he runs, like very aggressive. Quad injury in the second half, stayed on the sideline, but didn't return to the game. And a lot of people are asking about, should they get Snell because they're worried about Conner staying on the field.
Yeah, and I mean, he's the handcuff for now. At some point, Jalen Samuels will be back. He'll be the handcuff. But there's no doubt if you're in a deeper league and want to hold on to Snell just for the time being, short term, you can do that. And you're right. I mean, with Conner beat up, Snell handled the last 8 carries of the game. So the 16 to 17 split, a little bit misleading. Conner, still a primary guy. Ran more pass routes, had 7 targets in the game. We've seen him very busy as a pass catcher as well. Yeah, I mean, they're on their bye in week 7. When they come back, I expect him to be a fringe top 10 or 12 fantasy running back. That's what he's delivered so far. He is RB12 on the season, coming off, again, the top scoring week at the position. So that's where I put him. As for Benny Snell, off the bye, I mean, assuming Samuels is not back, I'm not going to start him. I think in non-PPR, maybe as a desperation flex value. I think about that point, about 6 teams will be on a bye, sort of in that range of the season. So maybe you're desperate and use him. Maybe he could score a touchdown for you, get 10 carries, but otherwise I'd stay away.
Let me ask you this. Yards per carry, 3.2 yards
very
per
low,
carry.
yeah, very low.
But last week, only 2.6 yards per carry. Sort of the feeling that I got was like they knew that they were going to be running the football primarily because they're trying to protect this young quarterback is filling in. Maybe Mason Rudolph comes back this week, but even so, the offense he's been running has been very intermediate and nothing of a huge threat. So a lot of James Conner running. Does that change the way defenses are playing him, and does that end up impacting what you see?
Yeah, nothing dictates yards per carry more than the number of defenders in the box.
Right.
Yeah, I've done a ton on that. I mean, that's
right.
all. That's what it's all about. Yep.
All right. Well, so keep it in the same division, and a player that has quietly kind of emerged, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty impressive. Bold statements recently from our friend Auden Tate of the Bengals. What are your expectations for him going forward?
Yeah, I'm excited for this kid.
Me
for
too.
Sure. 22 years old, a 7th round flyer in the 2018 draft. He's 6'5".
Huge, like a tight end.
Yeah, no doubt. And he's playing a ton in this Bengals offense right now. And he's been kind of reliable, right? 6+ targets in 4 straight games. He's had at least 50 yards or a touchdown during all 4 of those games. His target share is 23% during those 4 games. You love that sort of volume, and he's 27th in fantasy points among receivers during that span. So for now, he's a weekly flex.
There's still no AJ Green.
Yeah, exactly. Great. As long as Green's not back, I know he's listed as technically he's questionable right now. I don't think we expect him back probably till after their bye in a couple weeks. I mean, that's my
it
expectation.
certainly doesn't. There's nothing to indicate that he's all of a sudden going to appear.
Yeah, unless Tate runs into a shadow situation on the perimeter. I mean, I think he's a fringe wide receiver 3 in 12-team leagues and a flex option in 10 teams.
We've talked about this several times, but they throw the ball a ton. They're second in pass percentage this season, nearly 72%, because they are so dreadful on defense that they are just playing catch-up every single game. Beyond that, I've said this a couple of times now, like, they won't, but they should consider trading AJ Green. Like, what they need to do is turn the card over. This needs to be a Dolphins type situation where you're eyeing the future. And I'm not saying ignoring the present, but taking short-term hits for long-term benefit. And Auden Tate would be the kind of guy that could be maybe not the focal point of a passing game, but could be a focal point of a passing game that already has one building block with Tyler Boyd.
By the way, you mentioned the Bengals defense struggling. Obviously, it was really bad last year. They did pretty much nothing to address it in the offseason, and now their number 1, number 2, and number 3 cornerbacks are all out. I mean,
it's crazy.
They're a mess right now. I mean, they're going to continue to give up a ton of points. That's good news for Auden Tate, not as as an NFL player, but certainly in fantasy.
But definitely available on waiver wires as well. He has been on the column for, I think, 3 straight weeks now. A guy to keep in mind if you maybe have rolling waivers or you do a Wednesday night waiver run. Auden Tate certainly should be one of your priorities. All right, was one good game enough to feel better every single week about Stefon Diggs, Mike? Or, we do the wide receiver cornerback matchups with you on Thursdays because you write the piece that goes up on ESPN.com. Another part of your prolific profile of stuff that you do here for the company. And almost every week we end up highlighting a guy that's being shadowed or will be facing the Eagles and say, this guy's got a chance to break out. I think we're going to retire that part. Like, I think we need to retire. Like, if they're playing the Eagles, we no longer cover it in wide receiver cornerback matchup because we know what you're going to say. But Stefon Diggs had a massive game against the Eagles. Now, I think some people are trying to make this, was it just the Eagles or was this the return of Stefon Diggs? And maybe it's more likely to be somewhere in the middle. Where do you land on that conversation?
I land on it was the Eagles. It was the Eagles for the most part. I mean, yeah, like you said, most fantasy points allowed to receivers and most of the perimeter where he aligned. So it's just been a disaster. Their cornerbacks are a mess right now. We'll see, what we can get into that another time. They're going to get a little healthier at that spot. I don't know if it's going to make much of a difference. Eagles are just getting crushed in that area, and Diggs took advantage of that. I mean, if you look back to Chicago, which, again, we talked about that matchup because he has owned the Bears in recent seasons. He's just taken advantage of that secondary for whatever reason. Aside of those 2 games, he's been under 50 yards and has 0 touchdowns in his other 4 games this season. So it's been a certainly boom-bust production. And in this game, even though he had the 7 catches, the 3 touchdowns, Kirk Cousins attempted 29 passes in that game. It was still a very low-volume passing game for Minnesota. They had 35 rushing attempts in the game. He has had, the Vikings pass offense has looked much better the past couple of weeks, but they faced the Giants and the Eagles. Two teams that are near the top in every wide receiver category in the league. So I am not a hater.
Yeah, they
however,
the Lions this week.
They got the Lions, and the Lions secondary, tremendous job by them. Bringing in Rashawn Melvin and Justin Coleman to go with Darius Slade. That trio has been fantastic. It's going to be a lot tougher for Minnesota's passing game this week.
All right, well, you're not super optimistic on Stefon Diggs, it sounds like. I hope you're wrong, Mike, because a lot of people, myself included, have been holding on for dear hope with Stefon Diggs, and then we got a win this past weekend because of his 43.5 points. We're going to come back and have some rankings conversations over players that might be sort of interesting. However, before we do that, we have a quick word from, I believe, the Fantasy Show.
Time now for our daily reminder to don't be this guy. Today's submission comes from Nick Fronte. His commissioner admitted to cheating, so the entire league made T-shirts with his face on them with a clown nose. Like, is that enough of a punishment for a commissioner that cheated?
I think that commissioner should probably be out of the league if they cheated.
100%, but we're doing our part to embarrass him on national television. Shame on you.
Shame!
Shame!
Shame! Shame!
Shame! Shame!
Fantasy, you're in the 06010. Focus. Fantasy, focus.
We're back, and it's rankings time. Austin Ekeler for the Chargers was, well, he's kind of seen his fantasy value get nuked over the past couple of weeks. Actually, 2 weeks ago, he was great because they were down big, and he had 15 catches. This past weekend, though, was alarming. 35 snaps for Melvin Gordon, 27 for Austin Ekeler in week 6.
I'm only laughing because the whole Chargers offense was alarming.
That really was. That's a good point.
What a mess. Such a bad game.
Other than Mike Williams, it was just like, and Hunter Henry, I guess.
So I almost would
awful.
Put this in the context of a terrible offensive output. But go ahead, Field.
So where we're at, we all have him ranked as a top 25 play this week. But I'm wondering if no matter what we see and what we believe about Austin Ekeler's value, production, and ability relative to Melvin Gordon's, if it's just moot. Because maybe no matter what we think, doesn't it feel like the Chargers think something differently? And that Melvin Gordon is the kind of player that either they believe is better or, and this is, I think, very possible here, some running backs are like, they're like an engine. They need to get warmed up and revved, and that they don't they can't necessarily say, oh yeah, you know what, thing about Melvin Gordon is we'll get him like, half the carries or, 40% of the carries. Like they feel like he might be the kind of guy. I've actually always felt like Derrick Henry was this kind of player. You're either all in or all out of the player, because when you're somewhere in between, it ends up resulting in a pretty pedestrian day. So I kind of wonder if maybe that's where we're at with the Chargers and Melvin Gordon. And if so, what kind of impact does that have on Austin Ekeler?
Well, I don't think that the usage is terribly different, at least this past week, than it was last year, right? I mean, Austin Ekeler was still, again, we've talked about this before, kind of on the flex radar, right? So he was involved.
True. The
snap difference in this game was 35-27, and that was in favor of Gordon. In a bad game script, you would think that Ekeler would be more involved when they're throwing the football. That wasn't really the case. Ekeler actually had fewer targets and fewer carries than Gordon in this game. But I think there's some reason for optimism this week. You're facing Tennessee, 8th toughest against running backs in terms of fantasy points per snap, but they've had the 6th most targets and the 5th most receptions to running backs. So
that's why we're optimistic.
You would think that's why Ekeler is kind of on that RB2 fringe radar. So I think both of them right now are starting options despite the disaster that has been their offensive line. That has really crushed them.
I wonder, do you think, would either of you prefer that we just had clarity in the sense that, would you rather have a situation where Melvin Gordon just takes the job and it's clearly his, and Austin Ekeler is a player that is nothing more than a handcuff? Or are you okay, balancing, do I play Melvin Gordon? Do I play Austin Ekeler this week? Not that if you have both of them, but if you have one or the other. Because I think right now, if you have Austin Ekeler, it's no longer, now we have him ranked this way this week, but it's no longer just, no matter what, I'm playing Austin Ekeler this week.
Well, I think the lack of clarity is why we have jobs, right?
Well,
I mean, we have to tell you who to
think that we haven't seen it yet from Melvin Gordon. To go back to what you were saying, his average 2.45 yards per carry is the worst 2-game rushing stretch of his 5-year career. it's interesting because right while we were talking, an alert came on my phone, ESPN Fantasy of Eric Williams' article, where he talked to Melvin Gordon about exactly this thing. Because Melvin Gordon has said before that he feels like he needs to get going. Here's a couple quotes from there. It was just funny. I just got alerted. It's up on
timing
up
is
on
everything in life. Yeah.
From Melvin Gordon this week. No rhythm you can get into with 8 carries. I don't care what running back you are. He basically has said that he doesn't feel like he can get going unless he's touching the ball more. So even though he was out there for more snaps, he only had 8 carries, no carries in the fourth quarter at all. Obviously, they were down. They were trying to come from behind, so they weren't running the ball. And Anthony Lynn said, I don't think it has anything to do with Melvin. We've just got to open up more running lanes. So to answer your question, when the coach is saying, like, that's not a problem, we've got to fix this for him, I do think that they are going to try and force feed Melvin Gordon more. And here's a little interesting fact for you. The last time he played Tennessee, which was 2016, 32 carries, 196 rushing yards, and a touchdown. So obviously that was a while ago. Personnel is different, but he has a good memory there. I think that we have not, I don't think they're going to deviate from the plan, at least not yet. It's only been 2 weeks with Melvin Gordon, and the first week they were talking about easing him in. So I don't think we've seen, I think this differential could get larger. More Melvin Gordon, less Austin Ekeler. I don't know we're there yet. And if Ekeler proves to be the receiver that he was in Melvin Gordon's first game, there's plenty of room for Ekeler to serve a valuable purpose. But they can't get behind like they did because he won't fit in that scheme.
That's what I was going to say. That's the problem, is they're losing. They're trailing in games. I mean, you look at their carry totals, their called runs, the previous 4 games, 16 in a loss to Houston, 33 when they beat up on Miami. Okay, that one almost doesn't count this season. We should just cross that off of every team's opponent sheet. 15 against Denver in a loss and 14 against Pittsburgh. If they're not competitive or winning, they're not going to run the ball as much. It's that sort of thing is dictated by the scoreboard and the time left in the game. That's the issue. They have to win more games, and Gordon will be more involved.
It's weird. I'm not counting on this by any stretch, but if the Broncos win tomorrow night against the Chiefs, everything gets really interesting in that division, because as bad and pathetic as the Chargers have been in some ways this year, a win on Sunday would mean they would just be 1 game back of the Chiefs potentially in the division, and maybe a game and a half back of the Raiders if they win their game on Sunday against the Packers as well. Weird division.
Yeah, I wonder really quick if they lose at Tennessee and at Chicago and the Chiefs win a couple games, if Gordon could still be on the block, or if he gets be sent at the deadline, because he's not going to be if they lose both of them games, it's going to be another 15, 16 carry games, for the team, not just
6.
Him. And he's not going to be happy, and they're going to be out of it, and maybe they move on from him.
Trade deadline is 13 days away. I want Mike's take on Joe Mixon. We'll get there, but first, let's see what IBM Watson has to say about him via our favorite, Thirsty Kyle.
I got you covered. They say Joe Mixon, he's busted twice and boomed once this year, so I want to know what's going to happen or what's most likely to happen this week. IBM Watson gives him a slightly bigger chance.
No, after you're done, I'm going to weigh in after you're done.
Oh, okay.
I've got my hand raised.
You asked a question, so I think Field was raising his
He's
hand.
waiting for me to call on him. Got this. I went to school back in the day. He's got a 14% chance to bust, which would be under 4.5 points. 13% chance to go over 15.5 points, which would be a boom game. Mr. Field Yates, what do you think?
Bust.
Bust. Heard.
Bust.
Bust.
Bust. Did you watch Joe Mixon this past weekend?
I've watched him this season.
Have you watched him this season?
Yeah. It's not
Bust.
pretty.
That's my answer. I don't care. Yeah, that's right, Mike. I don't care if it's 4.5 points. Bust. Sick of it. I'm done. I'm done with this Joe Mixon nonsense. Done. Come on. He's terrible. I mean, he's been terrible this year. The offensive line, we know it stinks.
Yeah.
It stinks. And you know what? Listen, before people get too mad, I've still got him at running back 21, which I hated doing. I hated having Joe Mixon at running back 21. I'm just telling you, there are so few good running backs, especially when 4 teams are on a bye. 4 teams that include the likes of the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have a top 10 weekly running back play. The Browns, a top 10 weekly running back play. There are enough good running backs on bye this week that I somehow, some way had to find Joe Mixon at 21 of my running back rankings. Mike, please just, I don't know, just take it away.
You're really angry. You will not be buying a Joe Mixon
part of it,
it's so
but also
disappointing.
part of it too.
Yeah,
we're just
you're
talking
right.
about with the Chargers. I mean, they're behind, and so then they're throwing. And if the running game doesn't get going and isn't productive in this early part of the game, they're certainly not going to go to it in the end.
Yeah, and his snaps need to go up. He only played 49% in week 6. His carry share is down from last season. His target share is down to 8% from last season. You don't like that. He's actually only 20th in OFP, so it's not like he's super underperforming his usage. The usage just isn't quite there. Does have some bad luck in touchdowns, 2.6 OTD only has one score, so that number should be higher. If there is any optimism, Field Yates, for you this
Okay,
week,
thank you.
it would be that the Jags are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to running backs, the 5th most rushing yards, and the highest yards per carry at 5.4. So what do you do if you average like 2 yards a carry and you're facing a team averaging 5.5 yards per carry? Maybe he can average 3 yards a carry this week. Who knows? Like maybe he'll actually be okay. So
You are power of positivity, Mike. I like it.
Didn't Derrick Henry get going against the Jags?
Last year, 4 touchdowns.
Oh, you know what?
That was sweet.
Maybe you get the Derrick Henry repeat performance from Joe Mixon this week.
Yeah, maybe he has 4 touchdowns. That would be sweet. If he has 4 touchdowns, I don't know what I'll retire.
Yeah, we have a follow-up question in the back based on that passion. Is how many teams did you draft Joe Mixon onto?
Yeah, sounds
this
like
year?
a lot.
I don't have one.
Really?
I don't have him at all. But you know what? I can still feel strongly about a player even if I don't have him on any of my rosters. And it was not an intentional no drafting of Joe Mixon in the preseason. It just worked out that way. Just frustrating because it's, again, I actually can live with my teams having players that struggle, but it's like when I'm recommending him to other people, that's where it gets hard because I don't want to let the people down. I can let myself down. It happens. It's life. I wake up in the morning, I let myself down when I look in the mirror. But when I let someone down that asks me for advice, who do I play, Joe Mixon or, Matthew used the example, Joe Mixon or Chase Edmonds? And you're like, oh, you got to be Joe Mixon. But it actually turns out it should have been Chase Edmonds. You're like, Jesus.
Yeah.
Backup running backs are playing better than him.
It was really Joe who let them down, Joe Mixon.
That's one way of looking at it.
This is how I feel about O.J. Howard. So I can.
There you go.
I pushed him big time, and I'm hurting.
Okay, Brandin Cooks. Speaking of guys that have been disappointing of late, Brandin Cooks, 33 for me, 29 for both of you because you two are best friends. Brandin Cooks, though, has been disappointing so far this season in 3 out of 6 games. Now, the Falcons are sort of that gift that keeps on giving defensively, Mike. Seriously, take a look at the players that are meeting or exceeding expectations for Atlanta. They only play offense. Like, seriously, it's like Austin Hooper, and like that's about it in terms of guys that are playing above or playing sort of like elite football right now for them. Truly great football. Defensively, no one's playing truly great football for them right now. So, Brandin Cooks, can you possibly trust him this week?
I think so. I mean, despite all he feels like a bust, right, so far. I think we can all agree with that. He's still wide receiver 36, right? A couple good games, he's right back in that top 20 in at the wide receiver position. So, I think he can get back on track. 3 top 25s in a row prior to the last 2 games where he's been outside the top 50. 5 or fewer targets in 4 of 6 games is a bit of a red flag for me. I want to see that go up, but he has played 88% of the snaps. He was at 90% last year, so that's not far off. They just have to find him a way to get him the ball. And then you talked about it. The Falcons' defense has been a disaster. 3rd most fantasy points to receivers, 5 most to the perimeter, including the most over the past 4 weeks. So it's really been a problem over the past month, and that's where Cooks primarily plays. Wide receivers against the Falcons this season, top 6 in receptions, yards, touchdowns. They're allowing 10.8 yards per target. That's second highest in the league, and a 76% catch rate. That is highest allowed to wide receivers just across the board. A big problem area for the Falcons. I expect, and like you kind of mentioned, the Falcons could score points, so there's a chance this is a high-scoring game. I think Cooks can get back on track this week.
Plus the deep completions allowed, which I think is like, we just really haven't seen that with the Rams offense. And Cooper Kupp has certainly been Jared Goff's security blanket to me, and he's everywhere. But they haven't used that perimeter deep wide receiver that Brandin Cooks can be. Last week, remember, he just came out of the concussion protocol on Friday. Just don't know if that had anything to do with how his utilization went in the first game, but 3 catches for 18 yards and 2 carries for 14. Not really how you expect Brandin Cooks to be used.
This is not wide receiver cornerback matchup, but Mike did make a reference to the Jaguars playing the Bengals on Sunday, and the Bengals banged up secondary. So let's get to DJ. You guys call him Chark. I call him Chark. DJ Chark. He has been an awesome player so far this season. Wide receiver 5 on the year. Mike, not a great game last week, but the Saints are amazing. Marshawn Lattimore is next level over the past 3 weeks. Can DJ Chark get back on track in a major way this weekend?
I think he can. I mean, it's hard to believe he's 3rd in receiving yards at wide receiver right now, right? You mentioned he's 5th in fantasy points, 3rd in receiving yards, 2nd in touchdowns. He has 5 of those, 5th in end zone targets.
Yep.
So he might be a little over his head in the touchdown department, but still getting a lot of volume, a lot of work near the goal line. A 22% target share. We already talked about the Bengals secondary with Jackson, Kirkpatrick, and Darnold all out for them. So the matchup here is outstanding. The Bengals, even with Jackson and Kirkpatrick in for most of the season, have allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to receivers. And a lot of it's come on low volume, which is kind of crazy, right? 3rd most fantasy points to receivers, but they've seen the 2nd fewest routes and targets from receivers second fewest in both categories, still the third most fantasy points because they're allowing a massive yards per target and catch rate to the position. So it just sets up great for these Jags receivers across the board. Chark for sure. Westbrook, he can file in there as a wide receiver 3. His target volume's been great. I think he'll get back on track. And Chris Conley, DFS, or maybe you're in a pinch in the flex. I mean, you have to love this in Cincinnati.
There could be some. Oh,
No, I was going to echo what you said. I mean, I have DJ Chark, and we talk about it in that War Room League. I got him in the 16th round.
Oh, my favorite.
I'll never get that value again because now he's been discovered by everyone, including Gardner Minshew. But he looks for him. That's what you talked about. Like, he is targeted heavily in that offense.
Should be plenty of points scored, or could be plenty of points scored in the Cardinals and Giants game this weekend. Christian Kirk and Auden Tate are the 2 wide receivers we'll discuss here. But Stephania, do we think Christian Kirk's even going to play on Sunday?
Well, it remains a question. The Cardinals have not really been super forthcoming on his issue, kind of dismissing the ankle thing like it was no big deal. Remember when we first talked about it, it was like people weren't even really aware that he had an ankle injury, and there was some rumblings that it was a high ankle sprain he's dealing with. I don't know that nobody's really confirmed that, but certainly you would think with the fact that he's already been out a couple of weeks and still very questionable right now. So we'll see what he does in practice. I mean, I think the feeling is better about him this week, but I don't know that means ready to play better.
Well, Mike, if he is ready to play, let's just imagine he's ready to play. Matchup-wise against the Giants, who we know have had some struggles in the secondary so far this season. Not great cornerback depth or play there thus far. Maybe that changes when Sam Beal eventually returns, if he does return this year. Christian Kirk, how do you like his matchup against the Giants this weekend? And then conversely, Auden Tate, who we expect to again be the only, I'd say, super notable Giants wide receiver available with Sterling Shepard remaining in the concussion protocol, him against the Cardinals in turn.
Yeah, if I'm picking between these two, I'm going to go with Auden Tate. But Kirk, I think, is I was kind of talking about him as a bounce-back candidate after a slow start because of his usage, and then, of course, he got injured. But that still stands. I mean, if you look through week 4 before he got hurt, was 12th at wide receiver in targets and 11th in receptions, had not scored a touchdown, which was kind of misleading based on his usage. So I still think he can get going, especially against the Giants, as you mentioned, 4th most fantasy points to receivers, the most yards allowed, 6th most touchdowns with 8. So I like him. And then as for Tate, so far, 2 games with the Giants, 85% of the routes he has been on the field, 85% of their pass plays, I should say, he's been on the field, handling a hefty 24% target share, 15 targets in 2 games. And the Falcons, of course, allow a lot of plays, and the 12th most fantasy points allowed to receivers. The one thing I'll say about Tate is, don't get used to, a 60-yard touchdown catch. That's not his game. He doesn't score touchdowns, and he doesn't see much work downfield. You're going to see a lot of short area work, but that's fine in PPR, right?
Think about all the stuff that went into that one play that you're like, Auden Tate rarely catches long passes, right? The Patriots have not allowed a single passing touchdown all year up until that point. He's going up against Jonathan Jones, who might be, one of the, let's say, 3 best slot cornerbacks in football. And that happens on that play, right? And by the way, it was a ball that was tipped and bobbled. It was crazy. What a crazy sequence of events that leads to Auden Tate having a monster week 6. That game should be a lot of fun. Has a sneaky shootout potential, to borrow an old Matthew Berry turn of phrase. Mike Clay, in just a moment, we're going to have some social questions. Before we do that, you look like a man who is well groomed. That must mean that you go get your haircut at Sport Clips.
Absolutely. And field whatever the cut. Now there's a shortcut. We all love shortcuts, right? We're busy during the season. There's always something going on. We love shortcuts. What you should do right now is download the Sport Clips Haircuts app and check in online to reserve your spot. Flexible and convenient when you want it. Plus, self-check-in kiosks at all Sport Clips locations. And don't forget your beard trim. Sport Clips. You choose the cut, they cut the weight.
Time now to hand over to Keith for some social questions. Mr. Lipscomb, what you got for us?
Got a handful of them here. Paul wants to know off the top, how worried should we be about Patrick Mahomes' ankle? And then he follows up with at what point do we consider others over him? I think the second part's a little bit heavy, but the first part I'm interested in hearing.
No, I think I appreciate the question from Paul because I've been noticing, you know how sometimes you just look at, well, for me, it's like I'm looking at guys, I'm like, they're not themselves. Patrick Mahomes, clearly a huge talent, still making great plays, for the most part winning games, although not last week. And I'm like, that ankle isn't quite right. You know, he's been playing through this banged up ankle, and then Bill Barnwell comes along and quantifies it for me. And it was beautiful. He put out a tweet yesterday. If you get a chance, he wrote this 9 critical questions column yesterday. I highly recommend you take a look at it. And he put together, even in a tweet, some splits of Patrick Mahomes before and after the ankle, kind of looking at week 1 versus 5 and 6. And his completion percentage before the injury, 69.1%, down to 57.1% after it. His overall passer rating, 141.1 before the injury, 80 after it. If you go back now, you look at what happened to the run game in the last 2 weeks. We really haven't seen it as much. He's dropped back to pass 79% of plays in the last 2 weeks. That's the highest in the league. So that's a lot of pressure on the quarterback. His completion percentage, 56.4% week 5, 54.3%, the 2 lowest of the season. Now, Mahomes says he can still do everything. I can still scramble, throw, run. He clearly can move, but sometimes it's just the way you step into your throw. You notice he's sailing the ball quite a bit. We see that. Guys will say later, after they've recovered from something, well, yeah, I couldn't step all the way into my throw. Like, they won't acknowledge it up front, but they have never really said this is a high ankle injury, but it sort of appeared like a mechanism for it when it happened. But he just has looked like he's not totally comfortable on that foot. And we've seen him during the game grimacing, limping at times. He's a gamer. This isn't going to take him out of the game, but is it making him a little less effective? Probably. Am I starting somebody else over him? No. But I think it's something that's worth watching just to see what happens. Could it get worse? This is every time he's been stepped on, and he's had a couple, it's gotten worse.
I think it's reared itself in a couple of ways that you mentioned through Bill. I think the reality is that if you drafted Patrick Mahomes, you didn't waste a roster spot in the second quarterback. So it's not like you're already pondering somebody on your roster. And let's keep it simple here, guys. No, you're starting Patrick Mahomes. That's Stephania said. You're starting him. Like, he has shown himself to be matchup proof when healthy. Maybe the bigger takeaway is just that, like, Mike, I know you were on this maybe last week. Like, what's he on pace for now, touchdowns-wise?
I think it's 37.
37.
Still pretty good.
It's amazing. Yeah. But it's like, I didn't say it justifies, but like, it reminds us that, like, what he did last year, literally historic.
Right.
Yes. It's happened 3 times. This is our 100th season playing professional football. It's happened 3 times prior to that.
Exactly.
Here's what I would say, though. This is kind of an interesting thing to think about, because I've been watching this now really much more attentively the last 2 weeks, because I've seen him limping more. I've seen him more uncomfortable. And you start going, if you're the Chiefs and you're thinking about the potential, you're always thinking long-term, we're a team that could get to the playoffs, and do you want a guy who's getting worse as the season goes along? Or if you find a good opportunity, let's say he just tweaks it a little bit more, do they pull him out and say, okay, we got to get this right, because we're now putting your... There will be a point where it's not necessarily a decision. I'm not saying that they would hold him back and say, no, we just want you to sit and take it easy. I'm saying at a point where he is clearly, if he's clearly limping, if he aggravates it in game, and it becomes a point where they're like, you're not performing well enough that we think you're safe being out there.
By the way, and panic, we're in it's sort of panic mode with Mahomes. This is disaster. This is like, just the bad production for Pat Mahomes. Here's his fantasy point totals the past 3 weeks.
Okay.
18, 19, and 19. Like,
what?
You can live with that. Like, still pretty good, right? That's bad, right?
It's always
like,
good to put it into
him.
context, but I still think that sometimes we say a guy's so good, we just ignore the fact that maybe he's performing a little differently than he is when he was 100%.
He's next level. He is incredible. We hope he gets well Thursday night in Denver, traveling on a short week. Certainly a test of that ankle. It'll be up close and, I should say, front and center on Thursday night.
Days off, so
That's true.
Side.
That's a good point. All right, Keith, next one here.
You guys are missing on the bell today. Short week, Arrowhead earlier.
Nice.
I mean, come on. Let's go here.
I know. What's wrong with you? Well, Arrowhead is not so vaunted anymore. Deshaun Watson just proved that. He went in there and beat an Arrowhead. That's not supposed to happen.
Yeah, that's one of them overrated home field advantage situations is Arrowhead.
Ooh, careful, Mike.
No, it's true. Google that. If you're listening and you don't believe me, just Google Arrowhead home field advantage. There's tons of research on it. They have one of the lowest home field advantages.
I lived in Kansas City, as did Field.
Yeah.
I say what you can do with your research on that.
Yep.
Hey, facts only.
Wow, Mike, that is spicy.
Prison Mike is back.
Yeah, Prison Mike is back.
Welcome back, Prison Mike.
About to come out.
You think I was sick? I was in the clink. That's where I was.
Stop it. Stop.
And I got away with it too.
For what? What were you in the clink for?
Nothing. I don't.
I can't say.
I want to talk about it.
I'll get back to you. I can't
Talk about it. I get bad data.
Yeah,
that's right. I told someone to start Joe Mixon. I got thrown in the clink.
Exactly.
Oh, man.
clink.
A couple of analytics off the way, off the mark.
Gosh.
All right, Keith, what do you
starting
got?
Joe Mixon is criminal right now. So.
Yeah, it is.
Daniel wants to know, and this is not, as
Not
far as I
Daniel?
know,
Okay.
as far as I know, this is not the secret squirrel. I mean,
Okay.
this could be a burner account, I guess, but is Derrius Guice worth a stash in a 10-team league?
I'm struggling in a 14-team league to keep him on my bench right now. Like,
Really?
yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's tough. I think in 12 and 14 teamers, it's worth it. I've held on to him in the 14-teamer. In 10 teamers, I don't think so. I mean, unless you're really in bad shape
I
at
mean,
running back.
10-team league, I would say no. Because IR designated for return, right? So you hope he comes back. But we
Well,
don't.
not yet.
Not
We don't know
officially,
that.
right?
Well,
Yes. we
I'm
don't know.
assuming he's on the return list because he would technically be ready to go probably a couple weeks before that window.
Right.
So of people that they could bring back, I would think he would be one of them. But knowing that Washington is Washington and looking at where they are right now, it makes you wonder if they'd say, look, this kid had an ACL tear, comes back from that, has this other significant injury. Maybe we don't need to bring him back.
I agree too. And even if he comes back, are you going to expect him to get 20 touches, missing the first year and a half of his career? Bill Callahan wants to run, but he seems like Adrian Peterson. You have Chris Thompson there. It's hard to imagine him being a guy you feel good starting every week. Maybe during the fantasy playoffs, perhaps. But I mean, in 10 teamers, I don't think you have to do it.
Yeah, I would use that
there's better
spot for
options than
somebody
10
else.
teamers.
Right.
Okay.
There's other options.
Next question comes from Cliff. Thoughts on selling high on Nick Chubb before the threat of Kareem Hunt enters the mix?
This is hard. And here's the reason why. And we've talked about this season before. But listen, we don't know what the Browns are going to do with Kareem Hunt when he gets in the mix. It has nothing, and it's the Kareem Hunt plan could be completely independent of how Nick Chubb is playing. Because let's make no mistake about it, Nick Chubb has been one of the best backs in football this year. You know what Kareem Hunt is? One of the best backs in football. Mm-hmm. It is an incredibly unique circumstance that led to Kareem Hunt winding up in Cleveland. Obviously, he made massive, unforgivable transgressions off the field that led to him becoming available and being in a situation where very few teams, if any besides the Browns, were willing to take this risk. And they did. He has had to serve an 8-game suspension, or he is almost done with that 8-game suspension. I have no idea. I don't. Yeah. So my thing is that wide range of outcomes is back. One of them is that when he comes back, he gets 5 to 8 carries, and Nick Chubb remains a star. Right. One of them is also that they become shared backfield mates, and this could be like Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams in some games. So it would have to be a very enticing package for me to move off of Nick Chubb.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think they should, if they're not thinking like Ingram Kamara right now, if they're not planning that, especially at the offensive struggles. I mean, there's 2 teams in the league that don't have a 2+ touchdown game passing the ball, or
they're
2+
one of them,
passing.
Right?
Them and the Dolphins, right? Like that passing game's not doing so good. They should be thinking about how can we use both of these guys a lot to maximize this offense, as well as Beckham, of course. And we'll see if they do that. But look, I think you look at the state of running back and you start to get outside the top 10 or around the top 10, and you're like, would I trade Chubb for Kerryon Johnson or like Marlon Mack or Josh Day? I don't think you can do that. I mean, you can't do it. I think you just have to continue to ride the guy that's right now RB4 in fantasy points. Or you just do it.
Ethan wants to know, Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield the rest of the way? I'm assuming this is either a deep league or a shallow 2 QB league situation.
You know what? I thought when I first saw this, I was like, you got to relax, Baker. And I started looking into it. I'm like, I don't know. It's a tough, the Jets have already had
good for Sam Darnold for
both of them. For both of them, although it is easier for the Jets, no doubt. And they've already had their bye, which is a factor. And Baker's not playing well, and he's throwing interceptions, and he's getting sacked, and he adds nothing with his legs. It's a tough call. And honestly, I give a tiny edge to Darnold. I really do. Tiny edge. But it's crazy. It's even a conversation.
That was a more refined answer than my I'd pick Darnold, but it's like a 52-48
Exactly.
decision.
Yeah.
Mediocre.
I can't believe
3 for 3. Anything else, Keith? Are we saying goodbye?
Yeah, we got 3 more actually. Jason has a PPR. Jason has a PPR flex question for you. Sony Michel or John Brown this week?
John Brown. 50+ receiving yards in every game this season. Give me some John Brown.
Yeah, and they're playing Miami at home like that.
Yeah, that's right. That's part of the question.
Easy one for you guys, huh? All right. Walter wants to know, any news on Devin Singletary? I want to start Gore this week against Miami.
Not yet. And I
Check
think,
back tomorrow on that one. Yeah.
I'd start Gore anyway, though.
Yeah.
Because even if Singletary's back, right, they should be able to run the ball
as much
20
as they
times,
want.
Right.
Yeah.
30
And that's
times
why
in
I
the
thought it was a
second half.
worthwhile question, because
Right.
he sounds like he wants to start Frank Gore, and we would just say, go for it.
I would just do it
Yeah.
anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
You got the
I think
Dolphins. Do
both
whatever
could
you
be
want.
valuable,
Adrian Peterson
and
looked awesome last week.
Singletary has been gone a long time with this hamstring injury, which tells you that it was probably a little bit more serious. And so even if he comes back, he's probably not going to get a ton of work, which makes Frank Gore still valuable, but they could end up using him a lot in garbage time for them.
Yeah, I have Gore projected with 18 touches right now against Miami, and that is with Singletary in there. So, I mean, I think he's especially non-PPR, a good play, but definitely a flex option across the board.
And the last one here from Sam, Cortland Sutton or Hunter Henry at flex?
I'm sticking with Sutton. I think he's legit. And they're playing the Chiefs.
Chiefs
I mean,
good
they're going to have to
matchup
throw.
here. Just more likely for a wide receiver to find the end zone, it feels like, on average, in the tight end. And, do we really trust the Chargers? It was a great game last week from Hunter Henry, but, a defense in the Titans that actually does have strength up the middle.
Right.
Kenny Vaccaro, Kevin Byard.
It's a different
One of the best
matchup.
safety duos. Yeah, I think I would be good with Cortland Sutton as well. Speaking of Cortland Sutton, we're coming back tomorrow to preview Chiefs and Broncos. I can't wait to
I am
see.
so psyched for this
I can't wait for the game. I can't wait to see who picks who in that game tomorrow. We'll do Picks Can Pick 'em for that game, plus wide receiver, cornerback matchups, and lots of news. Updates on injuries like Devin Singletary and others. Until then, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Peace out.
He's a NASCAR guy with a basement shrine, a Langford fan for life. Chargers are off to a terrible start, but that won't change his mind. Matching up all the cornerbacks, touchdown regression and weekly stats. But if your team falls flat,